Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode 2 of the Enriched podcast. I'm your host, William Richmond. Today, I have a very special guest, honestly, one of the greatest storytellers I've met, my neighbor, Arnie Sherman. He's my neighbor in Missoula, Montana, and a great friend of ours. Arnie, thank you for hopping on the pod.
Will Richmond, it's a pleasure to be on the other side of the microphone, so to speak, and to share stories with you. And I'm very excited about your new podcast show, and I'm happy to help out in any way that I can.
Awesome, man. Yeah, let's dive right into it then.
Sure.
What was it like growing up in Long Island in the '60s? How was life like at that time?
Well, it's a long time ago. You brought somebody on the show that's I'm 77 now, and so I've had a
Oh, wow.
full, interesting life. I never imagined, in the 60s, where I would be now. If you'd have asked anybody back then who knew me and said, would Arnie Sherman have ended up in Missoula, Montana for almost, 30 years, nobody would have ever imagined that. I wouldn't have.
Yeah.
And what I thought I would be doing, even in my 20s and 30s, were not what I ended up doing. So just to, sort of back up a little bit, I was born in the Bronx Hospital, lived in Manhattan in a housing project as a young boy, moved to St. Louis for a year when my dad got transferred by his company. He worked for Universal Pictures at the time. I got transferred to St. Louis, Missoula. That was in the late 50s when TV shows like Bonanza and color TV had just come to the media world, and the movie theaters were in a big depression at that point. Everybody was watching TV. They had these...
Oh, really? Even back then, that was the case?
Yeah, they had put these magnifying glasses on their TV screens to make them look bigger instead of having bigger ones. The tubes back in those days were rather small, so they had these big magnifying glasses you put on top of your TV. And then in '58, the first color TV series was Bonanza, and that was a huge, Western, the big outdoors. And so my dad, they kept moving him to smaller and smaller towns. He had never really lived outside of New York, except for his journey at, basically 18 years old to fight in World War II in Europe. He was a corporal as a medic, and as a 19, 20-year-old liberated concentration camps. An experience that had profound effect on his life, and something he rarely, if ever, would talk about. It was such a traumatic experience for him. So
I'm sure, yeah.
He ended up coming back to New York. We ended up moving out to Farmingdale, Long Island. Went to high school. It was sort of kind of a working class high school. It wasn't one of the 5 towns or one of the more exclusive areas of Long Island. And under normal pressure from the kind of parents that I had that were had great ambitions for their son, they wanted me to be a doctor. That was
really?
important to them. Yeah. And while I was pretty good in chemistry and biology, and I did go away to college at the University of Cincinnati in pre-med, I really didn't enjoy it, didn't like it, and I switched to being a psychology major. I found that much more interesting. Human behavior.
Yeah. How receptive were your parents of that switch? Because I know, like, back in the days, I feel like there was a lot of pressure from parents, to like almost, go after what they think you should go after rather than, keeping a curious mind and, going for whatever you appeal to you.
They were not that happy with it. And even when I explained to them I could get a PhD, in psychology and still be called doctor, they weren't too happy with it. But you mentioned that important point. My grandfather, who was, people married young, in those generations, and he was only 46 years older than me, my grandfather. So when I was 20, he was, still a relatively vibrant man. And the one conversation I had with him that kind of informed my life was he was dying. He died at 72, and I saw him in the hospital, and he said to me, the one piece of advice I want to give you is essentially don't succumb to the pressures of people around you. Choose your own path. It was sort of the Walt Whitman speech. And in fact, I later in life, not that long ago, put a tattoo to commemorate my grandfather that says "Forge your own path," which it was really had a great impact on me. And I decided that I could not live the life that other people, envisioned for me. I had to live the life that felt right for me. And so, but Long Island was kind of cool. It was, sort of a melting pot. I grew up from the next town over from Billy Joel, and lots of the imagery that he uses in his songs, the Parkway Diner, Flag Brothers Shoes, all these kinds of things really resonate because he's a year younger and grew up in the sort of the same area. I caddied at Bethpage State Park where the U.S. Open is played, and a cute little story. I went back after probably 50 years I hadn't been on the golf course. And I went back a few years ago on Long Island to sort of revisit some of my childhood haunts. And I walked in and I remembered it just as clear as day. And I went into the gift shop in the clubhouse, and there were these Bethpage State Park T-shirts and paraphernalia. And I picked a hat and I picked a shirt. And I went over to the cash register, and there was an older, not as old as me, but an older guy working at the cash register. And I said, I just want to thank you for not really changing this place. It's just as I remembered it, and it's been a touchstone for me. This was the first job I ever had, and so I want to thank whoever decided to keep it in its original form. And he said, that's nice, $38. Typical kind of long response. That's nice story, $38. So,
no, it's interesting. I feel like some people, don't fully appreciate the history of where they work. I mean, who knows? Maybe this guy isn't really big on this job that he has. But I mean, there is a rich history there. Like you were saying, they hosted the U.S. Open. So I mean, it's interesting to have people come back and do what you did and revisit old memories. And it definitely, I'm sure it jogged certain experiences you had. They just started coming back in your memory, just being there.
Once I remember the first guy I ever caddied for, I lost his ball on the first shot. That was an inauspicious way to start off my caddying career. And back in the day,
you got to start somewhere.
They used to take the younger guys and make them carry doubles. You got $3 for a single and $2 for a double. So I'd be carrying around 2 full golf bags. They weren't made out of nylon or lightweight material back in those days. For 4.5, 5 hours for $5. But it was
that's a good workout,
it was a good learning experience, and it was got me to have a lifelong interest in golf. Something you can do. There are kind of 2 things you can do your whole life. You can follow the same sports team that you did when the first team you ever met when you were 5 years old or 4 years old. For me, I was born in the shadows of Yankee Stadium. So you can be a Yankee fan your whole life, for better or worse. Second thing you can do is play golf your whole life until you can't walk anymore. I had an uncle that was play golf well into his 90s. So it's an activity that, beside walking, that as long as you have some mobility and some flexibility, you can do it your whole life. And so that was a good thing to start off with. Yeah.
No, that's great. And then, so where did you professionally start out? It wasn't Missoula, right? You started out...
No. I've traveled and worked in 90 countries and lived in lots of places, more than 90 countries.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So when I graduated college, I went to work for the state of Ohio. The only time I ever had a job with a government agency as a rehabilitation counselor. A friend of mine in college said, I got a summer job working for the state of Ohio, rehabilitation counselor, working with handicapped, disabled, and challenged people. And I find it pretty interesting. You can do it before you go to graduate school in the fall.
Yeah.
And so I went there and worked there in the summer. And then it was during the Vietnam War. That was 1969. I graduated high school at 16. I graduated college at 20. So it was 1968. Wow. And I was 1A. My draft board, things that kind of don't exist anymore, but my draft board had me 1A. And I was going to go to, people back in those days who were anti-war were either going to leave the country or claim to be conscientious objectors. my strategy, I
Yeah.
think, was a little bit more complicated. I wasn't really interested in the war. I was, didn't support the war,
Hmm.
but I wasn't going to leave the country. My strategy was, if I did get drafted, I was going to go to officers training school, which would take time. I was hoping that by the time I went through all this extra training, things would be over,
Yeah.
And but the draft, I was doing so well in my job. I was young, enthusiastic. I was different than a lot of the other state employees. That the head of the department said, "If we can get you an occupational deferment, will you stay here?" And I said, "Well, let me think. Doing casework, social work, and rehabilitation work, or fighting in Vietnam, I think I'd be happy to stay
Yeah.
here." And I was able to get an
Oh,
occupational
100%.
deferment. They wrote my draft board and said I was doing a needed service that was hard to find someone to fill. And so I did that.
Yeah.
And then sort of after the war and after the draft situation, I was working very closely with a halfway house program for ex-cons. And I was helping
Okay.
their residents. Halfway house programs are pretty much set up so that 90 days before your sentence is up, particularly if you're a felony or a federal offender, they like you to be released in a supervised environment for 90 days to ease your way back and see if you can help find a job and get you situated. And so I left and went to work in a halfway house for a couple of years, and then there was an opportunity to start a new youth agency. I was working 78, 80 hours a week. All my friends, all my conversations were with convicts and ex-convicts, and I thought that was that was a little bit more of a darker path to go down than I really wanted to at that point in my life, because I was relatively young, and I had an opportunity to at 24 start a county-wide youth agency in the Cincinnati, Ohio area. I stayed in the area after I got my undergraduate degree in psychology at the University of Cincinnati, and then I got my graduate degree in administration at Xavier University with an emphasis on correctional administration and criminal justice management. I decided to work in the halfway house and then move into juvenile justice. And I started one of the first handful of runaway shelters in the United States. There was two major interstates that crossed right outside of Cincinnati. Cincinnati is called the tri-state area because it borders on 3 states: Indiana, Kentucky, and Ohio. And because of that major route, there were a lot of runaways that were picked up in that area that were traveling from one place to another. Most of them were running from something, not to something. And so I opened the first runaway shelter, the first co-ed runaway shelter, and ran a very well thought of county-wide youth agency that did employment work, did court diversion work, and ran a 15-bed runaway shelter. So that was kind of my whole career was in juvenile justice, criminal justice, and then I began teaching. At 22 years old, I was asked by Thomas More College in Northern Kentucky if I would come and teach a class in running criminal justice programs, and I did, and that sort of started my academic career. I was talking much more about, because a lot of the people that were working in the criminal justice field at that time didn't know much about how to manage a program. They were in it because they were police officers or they were probation officers, but they didn't know. They moved up in rank and they had to run departments and they had to manage budgets and they had to raise money and they had to do public relations, and they were never trained for that. So I was, and even though I was relatively young, I was younger than anybody I was teaching. It was an interesting opportunity to start sharing my experiences. Even though they were only a couple of years worth, they were pretty intense. And it was an interesting combination for me that early in my life to be doing that kind of work.
Yeah, no, and then you eventually moved into more business. How did that come to be? You went from public service to business. How did that all materialize?
While I got into that kind of work because I like working with people, I was good at management and administration and finance. I always had a good head for numbers. And so I ended up running organizations, and I started running national organizations. I went from Ohio to Chicago to Washington, D.C. I was the deputy director of the National Youth Work Alliance, doing legislative work and policy work. So I sort of really broadened out my portfolio of what I had interest in. And once you're doing juvenile justice lobbying and advocacy, you could do it on any topic. You know, when you've learned how to figure out, you know, how to be successful and present your case and all that sort of stuff. And then there was an opportunity in Chicago to run the largest coalition of human service organizations called the Illinois Collaboration on Youth and the Youth Network Council of Chicago, representing 150 agencies. And so at 28, I applied for that job and got that job. And so I was sort of the leader of community-based youth work in the state of Illinois for a few years, and then went on to run another national organization, and then started working on international leadership work. There's an organization created called the American Center for International Leadership, and they were taking young American leaders under the age of 40 to meet their counterparts around the world, particularly in contrarian countries, because there wasn't much opportunity for people to meet their counterparts in Soviet Union and China and Cuba, because they were communist countries and contrarian environments, and there wasn't a lot of trade. I found that interesting and got involved in helping create this organization. It was funded by Rockefeller Brothers and Eli Lilly Foundation and Cumming Engine Foundation. It was based in Indiana, and I got to meet some of the people. And then because my paternal grandparents came from Russia, the Soviet Union, immigrated at the beginning of the 19th century, I took a particular interest in the Soviet Union and was able in the early 80s to start traveling there as part of delegation to meet with leaders of the Communist Party there, because that's who you met with. There was no other leaders. Yeah, except party leaders.
And so, like, what were some of the goals, you know, with meeting with these contrarian nations? Like, what were you trying to achieve? Because I know, you know, they have very different ways of running, you know, their country versus us. We're a very capitalistic society and they were communists. So that must have been, you know, tough to navigate for sure.
Well, I learned early on, and one of my, you know, life lessons, business life lessons, is business is based on relationships, not systems. And so the point was to meet individuals and try to build a relationship to get to understand them and their lives and how they got to where they were, just kind of like what you're doing now, even though I didn't interview them, and then to understand us on a one-to-one basis, rather than trying to convince anybody how to be. You know, it's like convincing someone not to be a MAGA supporter, or convincing someone to be a MAGA supporter. That's almost impossible. You have your life, you know, identity already forged. But here you could say, I want to know about you and your life and how you do your work, and they would ask questions about my life, and by understanding each other's lives, you get a better understanding of what's going on. Plus, you form a personal relationship, which might be useful or helpful or in conducting future work. At that point, I had not done any international business per se. I had been doing leadership development work. I chaired there used to be, it doesn't exist anymore, but there was a thing called the Chautauqua Conference, because it convened in the United States in Chautauqua, New York. And it was a Soviet-U.S. leadership conference that was going on even during the Cold War. And I got to chair, I was U.S. chair of that one year, and got to go to Russia. It happened to be in Russia that year. They alternated. And so I chaired this, my co-chair was Madame Tereshkova, the first Soviet female cosmonaut. So it was kind of an interesting way to meet some prominent people in a country where most people back in the 80s and early 90s the only way they knew it was on TV. They would have never had an opportunity to go there. There wasn't much tourism going on back then, going to Moscow or St. Petersburg or anywhere else in the 15 republics of the former Soviet Union.
Yeah. And so then you started doing some business working for Marriott, right, in Russia? Mm-hmm. Kind of
what happened was we were doing these delegations and taking 15 American business leaders over, and then every other year they would bring 15 delegates to the United States. In fact, our organization was the host organization for Boris Yeltsin when he first came to the United States. I was part of the group that took him around the United States when he came here and got to know a little bit about him and his life and his take on things.
Yeah.
But one of the trips we went, I went to a business meeting with a fellow named Brad Skinner from CSX Logistics. I knew nothing about railroads. I knew nothing about shipping or any of that stuff. But he happened to be in the delegation. And it was the first meeting, and all the meetings I ever had with my Soviet, later Russian counterparts, where he asked them, "Is there anything we can help you with?" And the normal answer to that question for every meeting I'd ever been in up until that point was, and this was like 1996, 1986, excuse me. It was 1986. The answer was always, the peace-loving people of the Soviet Union don't need any help from anybody else, basically. We know how to do everything ourselves. And when he asked that question, they left the room, came back with a list of things. And they said, we're having problems with cistern waste along the railroad. We're having problems with vibrations of our cars on the rail tracks. We're having this kind of problem. We're doing transloading in heavy winds and cold weather, and we're having problems moving cars. They finally, first time ever, identified issues that maybe we could be helpful with. And Brad went back and told his CEO, John Snow, who later became U.S. Treasury Secretary, that the Soviets might be open to, collaboration and cooperation in the transportation sphere. And what I didn't know at that time, because it was rather confidential, is that George Bush and others had begun to talk about sending humanitarian aid to the Soviet Union. They saw things were changing. Perestroika was happening, which was the opening up of the society. And the first thing that they, the first area of cooperation would be to send humanitarian aid. They're having very tough winters, and there was very little food there. When you went there, you were shocked. I was shocked that there was so little. The only foreign product in the mid to late 80s you would find in all the Soviet Union was Pepsi-Cola, because Pepsi had done a bottling plant there, a couple of bottling plants. Everything else was, very, very poor quality food. And so CSX asked me, would I go over there on a 3-week feasibility mission? They knew I didn't know anything about the industry, but they could teach me in a few days. That's another lesson that I've learned over the years. If you know how to enter a new market and know the steps that are needed to choose a partner or to find, build relationships, you can learn content knowledge in 5 days. I can learn enough about transportation to understand, double stack container cars on railways and what a TEU and FEU is, 20-foot equivalent, 40-foot equivalent. I can learn all that stuff very quickly. And they didn't care that I wasn't an industry expert. They didn't have anybody that knew how to get them into the country and had contacts and relationships, which made things happen. So I went over there for So I went over there for 3 weeks, traveled all over the country, and it led to a 10-year relationship.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I mean, you earlier mentioned how important, forming those relationships are in terms of, opportunities down the line and just being successful in whatever endeavors you decide to get into. So I think, that's amazing that you were able to formulate that, even with not having, this extensive knowledge going in.
Right. I mean, and that led to, you mentioned Marriott. After we were successful in helping the subsidiary of CSX, I mean, we weren't going to build a railroad there, but CSX ran the largest U.S.-based shipping company, Sealand. They had 80 container ships, and they had operations all over the world. They had hundreds of thousands of containers, and that was who was going to move the humanitarian aid. That was who the contract was going to be to. And they had no idea how, once they got to the port, how do you get humanitarian aid 1,000 miles inland in the Soviet Union? The railroads were run by the military. They're not telling you how everything works and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So Bill Marriott heard that I had been successful in helping Sealand set up their operation, and he was very eager and keen on trying to get a Marriott hotel in Moscow. And they hired us to try to figure out if there was opportunity for building the Marriott brand in Moscow. And that was a great...
And why? What did they see in Moscow that appealed to them? Just being a major,
capital city, Some of their competitors were looking at it. The market was going to open up. You know, they thought it would be, you know, they knew there was some fantastic old properties, you know, right near the Kremlin, you know, that sort of thing. It's a global capital city, and they thought there might be an opportunity to be there. And it was very challenging because initially the mayor of Moscow said, I don't like Marriott. I stayed at one in the Newark airport.
Not really.
Yeah. And so I had to figure out a way to get the mayor to accept Bill Marriott's visit to begin to discuss. He said, I don't want Marriott in Moscow. And unlike in America, if a mayor doesn't like it, you know, it doesn't really matter, right? If the mayor of Cincinnati says, I don't really like Sheraton hotels, that doesn't stop you from going out in Reserve Street and buying 3 acres and meeting all the infrastructure requirements and opening a Sheraton, right? She can't block you.
Yeah.
Soviet Union, they can. You know, the city, you know, the city has much more power. And we figured out a way to get him to take the meeting. And I mean, it's a whole longer story. That alone would be a whole show. But I put the first Western TV commercials on Russian television.
Oh wow!
So to get exposure. I mean, this might be worth your listeners hearing about because this is an interest. I used to use this as a case study with college students. So the mayor of a city tells you they don't want you. And your client who's paying you money is coming over and wants to meet with the mayor. And the mayor says, I don't want to meet with him. So how do you get him to change his mind? You know, I mean, I had no particular crystal ball or, you know, magic wand or anything. So we spent a lot of time thinking about it. And I said, well, who has influence over him? His wife. You know, but his wife, who actually ran construction companies herself, wasn't really interested in talking to us about it, and she was busy doing other things. And the city council. You know, so I said, well, how do you get the city council to have some interest in this? Well, one thing that they all do is watch the news. Now, there was only 3 stations in Moscow. There was the Moscow station, there was the Russian station, and there was the Soviet station. So there was only 3. It was like ABC, NBC, CBS. That's what they had, 3 stations. And they all had nightly news, early and late. And so I went and negotiated an agreement. I got Marriott to give me the best footage they had, the best raw footage. I had a little bit of production experience on doing TV commercials. I had for a while a PR firm, and we did some public service analysis. And so I had a basic understanding. And we got this raw footage of all the best properties in the world, you know, where they're infinity swimming pools and, you know, everybody's well dressed and there's a big ballroom and there's chandeliers, all the best Marriotts. And I got the actor, the Russian version of the Academy Award winning actor that's based in Moscow. He was like the Morgan Freeman voice. Everybody knew his voice in Russia. Yeah. And I got him to do, we did a 2-minute commercial, a 2-minute Marriott commercial. And it says, and basically the message was, the greatest city in the world and the greatest hotel chain in the world ought to be partners. And we ran these, and I got to buy news adjacencies, and they didn't even know how to run it. They didn't know how much to charge. They had never done it before. The only thing that was on Russian TV at that point was were videos about tractors and stuff. That was never done. Really? So I basically said to him, this is how we do it in America. We start the news, and then the commentator says, and now for a special announcement. I kind of flipped a bit. And we ran them. We bought them for 5 days at 6 o'clock and 10 o'clock. And after about 2 days, I got a call from the mayor's office and said, the mayor gets the point. He'll meet with Bill Marriott. And so we got the meeting set up. There you go. So, you know, it takes a little bit of thinking and a little bit of strategy and, you know, building some relationships and treating people fairly and that sort of thing. So that's how the Russian experience happened. And we got other clients, and I had the largest post-Soviet private representational practice in the Soviet Union. We were doing stuff in all over the country at the time, just because of relationships. You know, built more of them, hired some good Russian employees that we found along the way who wanted to work for American companies. Got to meet a number of the oligarchs when they were still young and just getting their ideas about how to run things. And then, sort of the country privatized and changed, and we were no longer, innovators. We were the sort of Normandy invasion. We were the first, people on the beachhead, and then more and more people came.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't as particularly as interesting anymore after 10 years of doing that. And then,
and so then what was next after that, career-wise for you?
I was invited to speak at the university. I was doing a lot of speaking about this because we were successful. We got our clients what they wanted, whatever clients we had. We worked for William Morris Agency to look at entertainment opportunities. We worked for Fairchild Aircraft to see if there were short-haul aircraft opportunities for them. We worked for a company that in those days was called Stuckey, and they made railway stabilization equipment, and we introduced that to they still have a relationship. They have a 30-year relationship working with the Russian Rail Ministry. So we were doing all of that, and I was speaking a lot about it at different events and conferences of how to do business, in the Soviet Union, and then later in Russia and the former republics of the Soviet Union. And I got this request to come to Montana to speak at the University of Montana.
Wow.
And I had never been here before, and came out, did it, fell in love with Missoula. The day after the conference, I bought a vacation, what I thought was going to be a vacation house in Stevensville, Montana, in one day. Because I said to myself, if I don't lay down roots, I will always think fondly of Montana, but there's a lot of other places in the world, and I won't come back. I probably won't come back that often, and I'll lose what I feel in this short period of time. Driving up the Bitterroot and seeing the mountains, and again, I didn't even know where Stevens. The only reason I even asked to see Stevensville because somebody mentioned it was the oldest town in the state, and I said, "Well, let me go see the oldest settlement in the state of Montana." And I thought at that point it would be a good place to maybe buy a vacation home. Little did I know that for the same amount of money I spent there, I could have had 200 feet on Flathead Lake, which would have been a better investment and maybe a wise choice. Hey. But it led me to an opportunity to come to 2 years after I bought the place. I was offered the opportunity to come and run the World Trade Center for the state of Montana, which was domiciled at the business school at the University of Montana, and to also have a professorship and teach in the business school. And while I wasn't really ready for it, I was still in my 40s at that point, I felt like if I don't do it, somebody else is going to do it, and they're going to do it for a long time. And this is the right, if I was going to work here, this is what I would want to do. And they made a very attractive offer, not monetarily. There was no budget. There was no operating budget at all for the World Trade Center, zero money. But they said you can continue to do some of your consulting work for some of your global clients, and you can teach, and you can. We can help. Bring a global kind of understanding or business experience acumen to Montana, which was lacking at that point in time. There's very little, if anybody here that had any kind of global hands-on experience. They might be selling some stuff in Canada or somewhere else, but they didn't know how to really make things work in a very detailed way. So I came and did it.
Yeah. So
and sort of here I still am, based in Montana. Technology changed, in the last, I think, 15 years. Not a single person ever, when I'm talking to them or I call them or we're doing a call like this, they don't say, "Where are you?" They don't care where you are anymore. You can be based almost anywhere as long as you have the relationships and understand the markets and understand the industry and can make good connections for them and solve their problems. They don't care where you are. So as technology changed and telecommunications changed, and you could do these kinds of interactions with people, I was able to continue to build and do things that were meaningful to me and continue to be helpful in Montana as much as I could.
Yeah, no, and that's awesome. And then that, further led into you kind of being a mentor for people in a sense. Like with my brother, you kind of helped him through his process of finding a job, and I'm sure you've helped countless others. What kind of inspired you to want to do that?
Well, part of it is, my training, doing psychology and juvenile justice, youth work, trying to be a bit of a guide, and trying to use what I have learned and who I've met, to help folks. I've helped many people not only try to assess whether I'm not directive in what I do. I don't say take this job or here's a job that you should have, or you're wrong in what you're thinking. I've always learned over years, you give advice. Advice is just that. People can take it or leave it, and you shouldn't take it personal, because you don't know every little nuance of their life and what's going on and what factors are affecting them. But generally, I give pretty good advice, and I have good connections. So by helping them understand what they don't know and trying to give them a broader horizon about what's possible and how to maneuver it and how to figure it out. I used to do a lecture with my students who wanted to do international business. Many of them were from Montana. Many of them have never been in a taxi cab in their whole life. Many of them had never eaten a restaurant that had tablecloth. Just say, many of them had never been outside the United States, never had a passport. And I used to give them a lecture that you can get an international job offer within 30 days and money back guarantee if you do what I tell you to do. And the ones that did, it worked.
Yeah.
There's just a formula for how you do it. Some of it is, it's, as you've probably known, developing your career, it's hard to get a job unless you have a connection or you go there. You can't just send resumes out online and find jobs.
Yeah, it only gets you so far.
Exactly. So I found that.
Well, I think even like what you kind of did, coming up in your career, just talking to people and just hearing varying different perspectives and really just like becoming a better conversationalist. I think that's huge in being successful.
Right. For example, the question everybody usually asks when they're looking for a job, they're at a meeting or whatever. Do you have a job opening? That's the wrong question to ask somebody, because that only gets you a yes or a no for that one person. The right question is, do you know anybody that has a job opening? So the way you ask the question changes the possibilities that are potentially available to you. It's the same thing in negotiating and figuring out strategy. You don't want to ask questions that you can get a no answer to. Do you have a job opening? No. Well, thanks. If you ever have one, let me know. That's not going to get you anywhere. So I like the mentoring.
Is that like a philosophy that you developed over time, or you kind of had that going in, like you just like knew that was kind of the way you should conduct yourself?
Over time. I learned how to stand out a little bit more, and not just by being louder or funnier or more demonstrative. I learned by asking good questions, listening more than asking.
Yeah.
I never forget. I was before I thought I was going to be drafted. I was accepted into the clinical doctorate program at NYU, and I was going to go. And so I prepared myself. I was a psychology major, and I prepared for my. If someone said, do you prefer Adlerian or Freudian, whatever. I was doing all the research so I could answer any question. And I go there and I go into the dean's office because there's an interview before they fully accept you. And I walk in and it's the classic old-fashioned, right out of a movie office. Books to the ceiling, big leather chair he's sitting in, everything's dark wood. He's smoking a pipe. And he leans over the desk and he goes, so what do you want to know? That was his only thing he asked. I was not prepared for that.
Yeah. So how'd you kind of navigate that then?
Well, I kind of made a little bit of a joke. I said, besides knowing whether you want me to be one of your students, I'd like to know, where do you think this school is headed? Is there a particular philosophy that's, I just, try to be quick on my feet, to try to, get to a point where I got him talking. When I was raising money, I learned from that. When I was raising money, I once went to visit with a large Japanese company that was looking to give a foundation grant to the organization I was working for. And I did all my research, and this was in the days before you could ask ChatGPT, tell me everything you can about Toyota.
Yeah.
But I was reading stuff, and I walked in, and I was going up the elevator to meet with some of the corporate executives, and I said, well, I hear that, I've read that this new merger that you're considering with Chrysler is going to lead to this or that. And they were very happy that I could talk to them about their company. And I knew something about them. I've had a lot of students, when I gave internships to students, and they were coveted to be able to work at a World Trade Center. I had people that walked in who didn't even know the name of the organization. I can't tell you how many times a student walked in and said to me, hey, dude, is this the World Economic Organization? I mean, didn't even know the name of the organization.
Yeah.
And I said, no, that's in Seattle, Washington. You're a long way off from. If somebody walked in and said, I'm really excited about the possibility of an internship at the World Trade Center. I know that you did a trade mission last year to Israel, and you're planning one the students told me you're planning one to Ireland, and I'm really interested in Europe, and, I can speak about, somebody approaches me that way, that piques my interest. They have some drive, ambition, desire. They've done a little homework. I've taken many companies abroad and give them a big, thick briefing book because they've never been to Israel, or they've never been to Italy, or they've never been to South Africa, and they never read it. They think because they have product knowledge and know their company, and they're glib, and and they have a sales pitch, that they don't need to know anything. And so you take them to a meeting in Brazil. I took a trade delegation to Brazil, and we're meeting with the vice president of Brazil. And the trade business was there. And the vice president says, so who's your favorite Brazilian actor? Nobody knew. I prepared some information in the briefing book, or here are some famous Brazilian people, because they're probably going to ask you, just like somebody comes to Montana, have you ever heard of the Montana Grizz, or the rivalry between Montana State and University of Montana? Yeah. And they said, okay, well, who's your favorite Brazilian writer? There are Brazilian writers who won, the Nobel Prize. They had no idea. So they really got an understanding. This person hasn't taken even a modicum of time to learn anything about us. Why should I want him to be a partner?
Yeah.
So, it was...
No, that's very interesting.
A lot of it was, again, when you get to be as old as I am, you learn a lot of lessons along the way, and you kind of, catalog them. And when I talk to students, one of the things I tell them, which is true, I'd say in my career, and most of my last 25 years spent on international, I would say 90% of the time or more, when a company wanted to hire me, or a company met with me and was looking for advice, and they said, we're thinking about going to China. And I would say, why China? And they would say, well, blah, blah, blah. And I would say 90% of the time, whatever country they thought was the next best country for them to go to was not the right country for them.
Yeah.
It's too much competition. I would say, too much competition, too much expense, too much time. They don't have a budget to invest. Internet. American business is based on is transactional. We have a rule of law system. And a contract, you sign a contract and you think the deal's done. The rest of the world, 90% of the world works on relationship-based. And a contract, I used to tell students, and I tell businesses, is like a marriage license. It's the beginning of the relationship, not the end of the relationship. And if you don't really work after you got a contract, you're going to lose that contract. I mean, because it doesn't matter. What, are you going to sue somebody in Chinese court if they choose somebody else? So, I mean...
No, yeah, it's important to maintain those relationships.
Yeah.
You don't just build the foundation for it. You have to maintain it throughout, the years, or else,
or else
it does seem too transactional.
The question of, working with students and mentoring, most of the time when they either think they know what they want to do, it may not be right, or they may have very unrealistic expectations.
Yeah.
Like I was working with a relative of mine who I got he had never thought about working in the logistics arena. I said, well, I can probably get you a job. They're looking for people to, work on the docks and to be managers and do, commercial transportation work. He said, well, I would only do that if I could end up being maybe CEO of the company in someday. And I said, well, every one of these CEOs of that kind of logistics company have maritime training. They went to the U.S. Maritime Academy. They have military training. I mean, it's a very systematic way of doing stuff, and you have to have a lot of professional training. You're not going to learn to be a CEO on the job. That's not going to happen for you.
Yeah.
And they said, no, I can learn it. I can do it. And I said, well, you can, but you don't have the journeyman card to do it. It's like saying I could, be a CPA, but I never went to accounting school. I don't know anything about accounting, but I could learn it. You might be able to learn it.
I think that's an interesting point you bring up, because I think there's this notion with people in my generation, not to say this is everybody, but I think a lot of people think they can really expedite the process to get to, the top. But it takes years, and, it takes, pivoting this way, or like learning this, like you can't, it's not all just at the snap of a finger. We have all the information at, the snap of a finger, but it's a matter of acquiring that and implementing it. That takes time,
There was an old expression of we're drowning in information and we're starved for knowledge. And it's unfortunate that the media makes into superstars those 30 people in the whole world out of 8 billion who became billionaires in their 20s because of being in the right place at the right time. I would tell you that almost all of them started out with money from their family. I mean, Elon Musk, his father had diamond mines or whatever. Bill Gates' father had a ton of money, and was in a technology industry. They all had something. Nobody started out with zero and all of a sudden became, Jeff Bezos, same thing. And they think it's easy. Now, it is true that if that's your goal to become, super rich, you're not going to do that by earning a paycheck. You're going to have to start your own business. And there's a lot of wreckage in the fast lane, as Hunter Thompson used to say, in starting businesses. I mean, right now, I think there are, 10,000 cryptocurrencies that are out there? 95% of them are just going to, be in the trash heap of history. Only a few of them are going to win out. And you can't guess which one is going to be the right one. And it's just dumb.
It's all speculation.
It is. One of the stories that I'm fond of telling is that the guy who I got very close with, the man who ran Sealand Shipping, and a great guy, smart guy, finance background. He left because he got offered the job of being president of AT&T. He didn't know anything about telecommunications, but he knew how to run a company and he knew money, so they brought him in.
Yeah.
And then at one point, there was a lot of competition about who was going to move data. This was all before blockchain technology. Whether it's going to be satellite, whether it's going to be tower-based, not for cell phones, but for transmission of data, or cable under the ocean. There was lots of different ways of doing it. And a company that had a tower-based technology called Telligent offered him a job to be the new CEO. And back in the day, this is in the 90s, he was offered a $20 million signing bonus to come on board and be the CEO of this new company.
Wow.
And he was a smart guy. And he went out and hired 2 forensic technology experts to research the technology of this company. And they told him it was great. So he took the job. They went public. The stock went from $1 to $100 a share.
Wow, and how long?
6 months, 4 months, just boom.
Oh my God!
Because he had a name and a reputation, and he was hiring hundreds of people to put these towers up in cities for data transmission. And then the users, the customers, decided satellite was better. And the company went to zero in 3 weeks after that. And the point of that story really is, even a smart guy who hires smart people to try to figure out whether this is going to be work or not, it's a crapshoot. You don't know, where it's going to change. If tomorrow the banking industry decides it's going to use, Will Richmond crypto to be its blockchain and its data management system, Ethereum, Bitcoin, everybody, it's all going to tank. You don't know who's going to win out in that horse race. It's like having a Kentucky Derby and there's 500 horses racing, and you got to pick the one that's going to, for the three of them that are going to finish first, second, and third. It's very hard.
Yeah, no, it's definitely.
You're not going to become, very few people are going to become the billionaires. There's, I don't know, there's 1,000 of them in the world, 2,000, whatever there is. There's 8-9 billion people. They have to figure out. They have to figure, and the pathway. You already said this. The pathway to the top is a meandering one. You don't go to work in one. Very rarely do you go to work in one company, make it all the way up to the top to be the CEO, and then become really rich. That doesn't happen. Yeah. Most of it, if you want to do it, you're like Axe in Billions. If you ever watched Billions, Bobby Axelrod. You got to start your own thing and claw and fight, and build it, and then you got highs and lows. One day it wasn't 3 years ago that Elon Musk was almost bankrupt, so and now he's the richest man in the world. So when I meet with people who are looking at a career, I try to say, what are you interested in? You cannot find the right career by saying, I'll go anywhere and do anything. You got to be like the ant and the elephant. How did the ant eat the elephant? One bite at a time. You can't look at the whole world and say, because I'd say most of the people that I've talked to in my life about careers say, I'll go anywhere and I'll do anything. You're not going to find anything. You got to narrow that down a bite at a time to something that's manageable. Here are the 3 places, or here's the one place I really want to go. I really want to live in, San Francisco. I really want to live in LA. And what are you willing to do? In LA. What really turns you on? What are you interested in? What do you have an aptitude in? What would excite you every day waking up? What kind of job? What kind of company? What kind of experience? Because you're probably going to start off working for somebody. You're not going to just meet 3 guys and decide to start DocuSign. It's just not going to happen. It's 1 in a billion. And then by looking at it that way, and sometimes you have to take a job that doesn't even pay. I had a student once who said, I got a job offer in Washington, D.C., but I don't think I'm going to take it. And I said, well, what's the job offer? And at that time, Conrad Burns was a senator of the United States, and he chaired the Senate Committee on Telecommunications. And I said, well, what's the job? She said, well, it's just being a receptionist in the office for Senator Burns. I didn't go to get a master's degree just to be a receptionist. I said, do you know how many people would kill for that job? I said, what does a receptionist do in the office? Well, they sit there and talk to all, the people that are waiting to see the senator. And how often do you think the senator's on time? Well, probably he's behind schedule most of the time. So what do you got? You got FaceTime with the CEOs and the senior vice presidents of every major telecommunication company in the world will be coming right in front of you while you're sitting there. And you're not willing to.
That's crazy, Yeah,
think about it. That's why they have, at the old William Morris agency, which is now, Endeavor, they have everybody start in the mailroom. They have you start low and learn everything and get to meet everybody. So by the time, you're a few years in, you have a handle and understanding of it. She did take the job, and within 2 years, she was offered a great job at one of the companies, because they were seeing the senator all the time, and she was there all the time, and she knew everybody in the office, and senator liked her.
Yeah.
Why not hire her to work in your lobbying operation? So I mean, you sometimes have to take something that's beneath what you think or not really right to be able to get the contacts or the networks that are necessary to follow your real passion and your real underlying desire in your career, at least. Same thing in life in general. I mean, lessons apply in life in general.
Yeah, and it's super interesting because you gotta look at it with a long-term horizon, like what could this become, but you also don't want to excite yourself about what it could become. You just want to be present in the moment and just learn as much as you can, and then gradually work your way. And I think people, I've even struggled with that idea in my head, just like it's not gonna happen at the snap of a finger. You got to really work for it, and like wherever I want to get, it's going to take time and just experiences, building relationships. It's not instantaneous as, most people wish it was.
Well, the other thing is life has its way of interfering with your great goals and aspirations. I mean, at some point, like right now, if you were offered a job anywhere in the world and it was interesting to you, you could do it. If you had a wife and 2 kids, you might not be able to. She would have a career. Yeah. Maybe she's working, and you have I mean, your circumstances change, and you don't have the flexibility and the freedom. So if you have a wandering, appetite, a wandering heart, a wandering mind, and you want to find a partner to share that kind of life, you want to find somebody that's going to be a supporter of this creative life experience. The moving around and meandering. I was lucky I had a wife who was willing to always say yes and go and move around and experience that and find a job. And her job would be second. We never moved somewhere where she had a job first and then I found something. It was always because I had a new career opportunity. Plus, you got to be a bit of an optimist. You can't be a pessimist. I always, when I was looked at these opportunities, when Jon Snow asked me to go to Russia and spend 21 days there, and I had never worked in the industry, and I had never done a business thing there. And he offered me a lot of money in those days to do that. And I said to myself, sort of what a number of people probably wouldn't do, but some have the capability of doing. I said to myself, what's the worst thing that could happen?
Yeah.
And if you can handle the worst thing that can happen is I go and do it, and it all turns negative. I can't find anything, nothing. I can't get answers to any questions or whatever. The client's going to say, well, you did as long as you did your best. It's a tough place. You're the first one to try this. So I've always had an optimism that I thought I could figure out a way to make it work. The worst thing that happens, it doesn't work out. So I tell them that, and I'm honest about it, and then I move on to something else. Luckily, fortunately, almost most things worked out.
And you would have never known if you hadn't taken that leap of faith. So I think that's some great advice in itself for people. Just, if you have this opportunity, just go for it. And, worst case scenario, it doesn't work out, but you're still young, like fresh in your career. You can still go do something else.
Right, and you've learned a lot from the experience. And I mean, I could go on and tell you stories about all the horrible things that I was able to, sort of rescue. The shoestring catch, so to speak, at the nick of time. Flying my first executives to Russia on the first trip, the embassy wouldn't give me the visas. These guys are already in the air, flying, wouldn't give me the visas. I had to figure out a way in 5 hours to get them to change their mind. You have these things like my sleepless nights were not whether I was going to be successful or not, or whether I was going to win or lose. My sleepless nights in business were always, have I thought of every possible thing that could happen? And do I have a plan should it happen? But even when you do that, I mean, I never saw a business plan from any company that said, we're going to have a COVID pandemic and things are going to shut down. There was not anybody's business. So things could happen you have completely no control over. But a lot of what you think you have no control over, you do have control over. If you think about what happens if I show up and, they say we don't. I took up my first group of business people into the into the Russian Commercial Service office, 2000 Connecticut Avenue in D.C. for the first meeting. After I had met with the guy ahead of time who said, please bring them in. And he said to them, I don't know what you're doing here. There's no opportunities for you in our country.
Yeah.
And luckily, the guys that I brought into the meeting had worked in China in the 70s. They worked around the world, and they weren't set back by what the guy said. They just thought it was a challenge, right? They said after the meeting, I was ready to apologize, and the guy said, "Don't apologize." That was great that he said that. That means he's saying it to everybody. That means if we figure out a way to do it, we're going to be first in line. They took a very negative set of circumstances and saw it in the best possible way they could see it. They loved it.
Yeah.
Because we can figure out how to make an opportunity there. And we'll be first. And they were first.
Wow. Yeah. That's also a good lesson in itself. Just, looking at a challenge and just reframing your mindset around it. Not always being like, okay, well, I can't do that. Find a workaround and really think about how you can attack that challenge.
There's always a workaround. I just told you, the mayor says no. This guy says there's no opportunity. You always have to. And the other important lesson I learned over all these years is we have a very American-centric style of doing business, and it's sort of like I sort of call it like the John Wayne style. We're often arrogant. We have the best stuff. America's the best country. We're impatient. We're poor listeners. We're sort of naive. I don't need to know any. I mean, I've had so many people say, I don't need to know anything about Brazil. I could sell ice to Eskimos. Just get me in the room. And they never would sell any ice to Eskimos because they were naive, about what's going on. You have to figure out in every situation what the people you're working with want. What's in it for them? Why are they meeting with you? Why do they do? What's in it for them? And how? Yeah. And if you find that out before they find out why you're there, you have a good competitive negotiating stance. If you figure out the real reason, because often the reason they're meeting is not the real is a pretense for something else. Mm-hmm. So you just have to you said workaround. That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm. All right, yeah. Let's dive into like kind of my last topic I have for you is that podcast you have with my dad. As a co-host, it's called What Do You Know, right? On KGVO?
Yep. What Do You Know on News Talk KGVO. I've been fortunate enough that your father put his arm around me 10 years ago and said, let's do a radio show together. I had just been, I had done a lot of media stuff, but I had never done a show. And he basically said, let's start a radio show. And we came up with the name, What Do You Know? And started bringing in, people of interest with some kind of, in most cases, some kind of Montana tie connection, and in some cases just personal connections with him or I, and spending 45 minutes chatting with them about their life, their experience, kind of gleaning lessons from them. How did you do what you did? Why did you do what you did? What was your background? If you had things to do over, what would you do differently? I mean, and they're all kind of interesting, learning experiences. And most of the people very much enjoy having that kind of free-floating conversation. So we've done, elected officials, we've done entertainment people, we've done business leaders, of course, we've done community leaders, we've done events people. One of the great shows, your dad had a relationship with the actor who played Uncle Junior on The Sopranos.
Dominic.
And Dominic was on the show, and I asked him the one question that I really wanted to know. I said, when you were at the very last episode when you were acting, well, you were acting like you had dementia. Was that true or not? Was the character really in dementia, or were you just doing that so you didn't have to answer Tony's questions about where the money is?
Yeah.
And he said, no, it was written I was really out of touch. Because what he said to him is, Uncle Jew, you were the head of the largest, crime family in Jersey. And his answer was, that's nice. Yeah, it was well written. We had a good time with him and almost everybody that we had on the show. And your dad has a lot of enthusiasm, and he's great professionally, has good industry ties, and so we've been able to, piggyback on his relationships and my relationships to have some interesting shows over the years. And we've had, in 10 years, we've done hundreds of shows now. It also led me to be asked by Montana Public Radio to do a show I did for 5 years called Can Do Essential Business Lessons. A lot of it was during COVID and right after COVID, which was produced here in Missoula, but it was a national podcast for National Public Radio on business topics.
Nice.
Specifically business topics.
That's awesome.
And so that was a fun thing to do.
No, and it's interesting, just you mentioning like the premise of What Do You Know, because it is very similar to what I'm trying to get after with my podcast, just diving into people's experience and like what lessons they have for the youth, what they would have done differently, like very similar. So I think it's only fitting I had, my dad as the first guest and you as the second, because you guys have a wealth of experience. You're both great storytellers.
Right.
And
his background is different, but also deep in what he did. I mean, award-winning, working for AOL, doing documentaries, all that kind of stuff, working in, multimedia at Madison Square Garden. He has for Missoula, he has a very deep and broad set of, entertainment and media contacts and relationships. And it's funny that we just ended up being neighbors, and being able to do the show together and having some very, interesting people. We've been doing it so long that several of our guests are no longer with us that we've had. And occasionally we rebroadcast those shows. We had Margot Kidder, who was the original Lois Lane in Superman. And she passed away. We had the late Mayor John Engen as one of our guests. So it's been around long enough now that we sort of have this interesting history, and it's cataloged.
And I feel like that's what's so amazing about, radio shows and podcasts is you interview these people and you have that forever, regardless if they pass on or not. Like I want to, interview my grandma who's 92 years old. I think that would make for a phenomenal interview because she has so much to talk about, 92 years of experiences.
Right. I mean, I wish my wife's grandmother died a few years back. She lived to be 107.
Oh my God! Wow.
And she was born in 1899.
Wow.
And she was a nurse in World War I, earning $1 a day. And she said to me one time, she felt very bad about making $1 a day because coal miners were only making 50 cents a day. She was 27 before she had electricity in the house she lived in.
Wow.
And I never recorded her because I wasn't at that point in my life to have a show, but I should have been smart enough to sit down with her and go over all that stuff, because here's somebody who lived in 3 centuries.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's quite the perspective in itself, just having all that, longevity. And I mean, but hey, you have the lessons and the knowledge you acquired from her that you can still put out there. You don't have her there, of course, but
same thing about my immigrants. My immigrant family. I went to the town in 1983. I went to the town my grandfather was born in the Soviet Union. It's a little tiny nothing of a town, which he got moved out of, because of the pogroms, and then they had to, escape to the United States in 1904. They came to the United States. And so I was the only member of the family to ever go there, and I took pictures and put a whole slideshow together and brought all the family members who were still alive at that point. Unfortunately, my grandfather had passed, but his brothers, he was the oldest. He had some younger brothers who were still alive, and I did a slideshow for everybody about the town that they're families came from, and they had no idea. They knew of it, but they had no visceral understanding of this is the actual place.
Yeah.
So
no, and that must have been a very it's a very special moment to share that with your family.
Yeah, because I mean, at some point in your life, you don't pay attention to it, but then all of a sudden, it hits you. You have a child or you have a grandchild at some point, and they say, "Well, tell me about your grandparent, your grandfather, or your great grandfather," and you might not know. And somebody wants to know their roots. They want to know their history. They want to know where their genetics came from, and the further back you can go. In Europe, they're very sensitive to this. They can go back They go back to the 1400s. They know my uncle was a shopkeeper in Brisbane, and whatever. We don't pay as much attention to it. But at some point in life, everybody sort of says, "I wonder where I really came from. Where are my roots? Where are my heritage? What's in my family tree, so to speak?" And with even if you can do it genetically, you do 23andMe or whatever, and they can tell you you're 80% this or 30% this, and it still doesn't tell you the story.
Yeah, it's a small nugget of the whole experience and story. So
because it's all part of you. Your grandparents and great grandparents are part of you. So it's something.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Arnie, for taking the time to interview. This came out great.
It's easy to talk about myself and these experiences, and obviously it could go on much longer. I'm glad we had the chance to do this together. I'm pleased that you asked me to follow your dad on the show, and happy to join you later on at any point in your successful podcast career and embellish some of the things we've talked about.
Yeah, no, definitely. And then also, just one more thing. Where can people listen to What Do You Know? Where, if you want to plug that.
If you want to go, you can go to newstalkkgvo.com online and just click on What Do You Know? Or you can just, as you can just type in KGVO, What Do You Know? And there'll be a link, and every one of the shows for 10 years will pop up.
There we go. That's good SEO.
You can go back and spend a long time listening to a lot of interesting people.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, thank you, Arnie.
Thank you, Will. It's a pleasure.
Yes. All right, take care.
Take care.
If perfect is as perfect as, then I'll never say no to anything or anyone. If perfect is as perfect as, let this valley take me home.